Welcome to the Back on Track podcast with me, Sam West. In every episode, I interview someone who's changed, recovered, or become successful after having faced real adversity in their life. What's more, at the end of every episode, guests give you a few bits of advice which you can use to improve your own life too. On today's episode is best-selling author and addict in recovery, Jordan Barnes. It became apparent from a young age that Jordan was susceptible to addiction, first beginning with alcohol and then moving on to heroin during college. After trying the powerful and destructive drug, Jordan soon found himself using daily and living on the streets of Portland, having to shoplift to sustain himself. After waking up next to his friend who had tragically overdosed and passed away, Jordan knew that he had to try and change his life. What followed were a number of tough years as Jordan returned home to Hawaii and checked himself into an intense 2-year program of recovery. I'm really pleased to say that since then, Jordan has never looked back and has even become a best-selling author with his debut memoir book, One Hit Away, which details his full journey of addiction and recovery. So, without further ado, let's find out what happened by listening to his story from start to finish. Jordan, let's get straight into it. And rewinding back to somewhere near the start of your story, you were raised in Hawaii, and your parents had one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, awning companies on the island, and that subsequently meant that they might not have been around as much. And there was this sort of deal that was proposed to you by your parents, which was something along the lines of, if you don't drink or take drugs until the age of 16, then they'd give you $1,000, and that seemed quite interesting to me. And I'm wondering, first of all, how you if you managed that, and also if you think that had any effect on you moving forward.
Definitely. So I am the youngest of 3 boys, and the same deal was offered to all 3 of us. And actually, it was not my dad's idea. He got it from my uncle, and my uncle offered it to his two sons, my 2 cousins. And I can't blame anyone for my own decisions. However, what that did, I think, is there was a lot of unintended consequences. So by not smoking a cigarette, by not dabbling with drugs until I hit the age of 16, I basically found myself using that deal as a crutch, basically when peer pressure came. And I would say, oh, I've got this thing I'm working towards, like I'm good. And I leaned on that heavily. And then it seemed like as soon as I turned 16, I had $1,000 cash, which is a lot for a teenager. And then I had no confidence to stand behind. And I just went kind of all out at that point. The other thing was I was drinking heavily. So the deal, my mind looks for a loophole, and the deal didn't include alcohol. And so when my friends would be experimenting with pot from 13, 14, I would be with them drinking, trying to match a buzz, and it's apples to oranges. It's not possible. So I found myself drinking a lot, getting into a lot of trouble with alcohol, and showing early signs of alcoholism tendencies. And then as soon as I turned 16, my friends that were experimenting with other drugs, I just dove in. And so I don't blame anyone for that, but that's part of my story. And it's definitely not something I intend to do with my son.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. But you can see that, your parents were trying to do the right thing. They had all of the best intentions in the world. And it's very easy to look back on these things with hindsight, and you're great that you've learned that for your children, that's something that you might not do. But yeah, you mentioned there that things sort of began to spiral out of control as you didn't have that sort of reason not to do things to fall back on. And I think you mentioned to me before you began using things like cocaine, weed, and you were drinking heavily. And also, it was around this sort of period of time that you ended up getting kicked out of school, and you would run away from home from time to time. So things really took a drastic turn. And I'm just wondering why you think it became so self-destructive, and if at that point you were probably dealing with what would be deemed as an addiction.
Yeah, I think that addiction runs deep in my family. Both of my brothers are alcoholics. My one brother passed in a few days. We celebrate, or not celebrate, but it's the mark of his recent death just 2 years ago from alcoholism. It's rampant through our family. So I definitely believe I have a predisposition to addictive thinking. Hawaii is extremely it's weird how your perspective changes. Hawaii is extremely unforgiving in terms of cost of living. It's ungodly expensive. And to make it with not just yourself, but 3 kids, and then to put a private education above all else. Like, I understand my parents had to sacrifice a tremendous amount to get us into the school that we went to and to own our home and all that. But there's a cost to that too. So they were just busy. They were just always busy. And I look back and I think of like the family business as like a 4th kid that kind of took a lot of attention. And I think I didn't see it at the time because it's hard to see so far ahead when you don't have the life experience to draw upon. I mean, today I know what it means to have to make your mortgage payment. Today I know what it means to have to pay your bills. And now I know what it means to have a kid. So I think I didn't see that for what it was. So part of me was angry. Part of me was frustrated. And part of me just didn't get it. I didn't get it. And so I have wonderful parents that were responsible and they wanted the best for us and they have good ethics. They're not abusive, none of that. Like, you probably couldn't ask for better parents than what I had. But I have to offset that with who I am as a person, and who I am is someone that leans towards destructive thinking. And that was going from an early age. And it also didn't stop. I don't learn my lesson like after the first time. I had a DUI at 16 and I had one at 17 back to back. So stuff like that. Like, it takes me a while to get things. It's not that I'm slow. It's just that I didn't really care so much for the punishment. I did what I wanted to do. I'm hard-headed and stubborn. And in many ways, that's the beginning of my downfall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the case for a lot of people. And
yeah.
And you mentioned your parents there, and that's one thing that really comes across in the book is their unconditional love for you and their massive support for you, which we'll touch on later. But that absolutely does come across. And so after you were kicked out of school, you went to what you described to me as effectively a fake school,
a fake school,
whereby you would effectively, by turning up, you would get straight A's and all the rest of it. And that was great in the sense that allowed you to get into college and travel to Portland, right? But you also said something that stuck with me when we spoke, and that was that you take yourself with you wherever you go. And what I think you meant by that was that a change of scenery doesn't necessarily mean there will be a change in behavior.
Exactly.
And that transpired to be true, because when you got to Portland, the sort of the 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off of drinking continued. I think you got yourself into an altercation, and did you like split your head open or something? I think you mentioned, and there was a forgery or something like that happened. So things were really spiraling out of control. But it seems the real turning point in the book that took things to that next level is when one of your roommates or a guy living in the same block as you offered you heroin. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about how that came about, him offering that to you, and how things changed from that moment.
Yeah. So I think, it's not like someone trips and falls and accidentally does heroin. However, I walked into it not knowing what it was. I walked into it looking for a way out. And again, I will always accept responsibility for my decisions. It's not my friend's kuleana or responsibility. It's a decision I made. But to understand why someone would make that decision is what you talked about. It was the years of heavy binge drinking, and it was so destructive. Like you said, the first day moving into my freshman dorm, drunk with a bunch of kids, got into a scrap with someone, got booted in the back, and I flew down like 10 steps and I split my head open. I got rushed to the hospital, had a fake ID I actually went to the Hawaii driver's license and took my brother's social and birth certificate and got a real ID with my picture on it with his name. And then I got possession of forged instrument, just like so many things in my life linked intimately to drinking. And so this goes on throughout college, and I get to a point where I'm in a relationship with a girl I love, and something bad happens and she gives me an ultimatum, stop drinking. And I do, but I only do because I'm served an ultimatum. And eventually I go back to it. That relationship ends. I'm back in the dorm. I'm drinking heavily, and someone sees me. This guy sees me, sees what I'm going through. And to his credit, I think he really did want to help me. I think alcohol can be severely destructive. It can be, I had I was just in the hospital previous to that because I was retching so violently that they thought I tore my esophagus and I collapsed the lung because I had
Jesus.
finished a bender. So I was drinking myself to death. And he saw that and he's like, hey man, like why? Like, why don't you try something else? And at that point it was like, okay, like I was so sick of it that I was willing to do anything. And it's not, obviously it's not the way to stop drinking is to switch to heroin. It's like they say, you trade one addiction for another. It's exactly what I did. That's exactly what happened. But I did stop drinking, but it was a very, very poor choice that led me into a world of hurt really quick. But he really did, I think that he wanted to help me and he didn't know how, and he was an addict himself, and we're still in touch, and we've both gone very different
Ways.
paths. Yeah.
Sadly.
But yeah, I think to that regard, I was looking for a way out, and I was sort of at my wit's end, and I was willing to take anything that would help. And I was just misguided in that regard.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I can see how that came around. Jordan, what did it give you in terms of the sort of feeling that made you sort of so addicted to it that caused it to take over your life and replace the drinking? What was it that appealed to you in the beginning?
I think it's a very powerful narcotic, and it can hit you really hard. I'm always mindful not to talk about what it felt like because I don't want to give people the impression that it was anything good.
No, of course.
It's definitely intimately addicting from the onset. So much so that I would drop everything I was doing at that point to chase it, including paying rent, going to school, my family. Everything instantly fell to the wayside. And so in that regard, I'll say it's extremely powerful. And that's sort of that's what gets you. And it's sad because what gets you initially, like they say, it's totally true. It ends up becoming something you chase that you don't find again. And it's very sad because you become physically dependent, and then you become sick without it. And then you start to hate yourself, and it goes downhill really quick. So the feeling was definitely, I wrote about it in the scene where I used, but I'm always mindful not to.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly responsible way of looking at it. I just thought that there'd be a lot of people listening who haven't experienced that, and for them to understand the power of it, it was a question that I wanted to ask. But I think without going into the exact feelings, you painted a really powerful picture there for the effect it has on you. So yeah, no, I think that was a very responsible response to that question. And you mentioned there sort of how it took control of your life, and this resulted in you dropping out of college. You ended up living on the streets and then having to shoplift to sustain yourself. So I mean, really at rock bottom. Could you talk us through how quickly that process happened?
A few months. So I started off smoking. They call it chasing the dragon, smoking off a foil. And it quickly gets to a point where you realize that it's expensive and that there's more efficient ways to use. And in very short order, I was injecting like really quick. I mean, I went from smoking to injecting, it seemed like, in just a matter of weeks. And that's where things really take a turn. I mean, that's like a lot of people draw the line at needles, and they'll stick to just smoking or snorting, or depending on where they are in the country. It was just rapid, and it's hard because you have to like support this habit. You don't have a choice. We all have a choice, but it feels like you don't have a choice. And when you have a physical dependence on something like heroin, and it's got its like talons in you, you basically do whatever you have to do. And like you said, I was shoplifting day in and day out, and it was horrifically. It just made me a very anxious person. It made me someone that, because you're constantly a threat. You're like stealing to get your dope, but if you get caught stealing, you can't go get your dope. And it's this like dichotomy of like this push and pull, and you're caught in the middle. And it's horrible. It's very difficult. It's very strenuous.
And you're always against the clock because you can't go a certain amount of time without it, because then you end up getting sick. And and I can imagine that must be incredibly anxiety inducing. And so obviously you touched on a bit about how the shoplifting was part of your day there, but I'm just wondering if for listeners you could try and paint a picture of, what a sort of average day was like for you living on the streets, what the kind of routine would be, and sort of how bad it was, because obviously you open the book with a very powerful scene, which we'll get to in a bit. But before we do, if you could just talk about sort of how the day-to-day life was.
So when I was at my peak using, I had a pretty high tolerance, and with a high tolerance comes this like insatiable appetite for dope. And that would mean that I would wake up and I would always either be sick or on the verge of being sick. I was never the type of addict that could save a wake up hit to like set himself right and go and start the day. I always told myself I'd figure it out in the morning. And that led to a very, like I said, a very anxious lifestyle. I was homeless, and Portland is if you want to be homeless, it's a decent city to be homeless. There's a lot of support out there. There's a lot of food out there. There's a lot of, I wouldn't go to the shelters, but I would get sleeping bags. But I would move from place to place. And I would often come to the city during the day and then leave the city to go to the suburbs at night. It wasn't always like that. I used to sleep downtown in a doorway or under a vent, but it was just very unsettling because you never know, like the city doesn't really sleep, and there's always people out to like jack you if they can, or there's a lot of drama, and I didn't like that. And so my life was wake up, go and shoplift. I would borrow a phone, or I would sacrifice the quarter or 50 cents to the payphone. I always hated putting money in the payphone because every dollar is invaluable. And I would just chase the dealers all throughout the day, meet them, trade, get my stuff, go fix. That would take forever. That would be a grueling process because I had horrible veins. And then as soon as I would go right back to the next lick. And I would do that. And sometimes they would send me out and like, hey, I want cologne or I want shoes. And I would just go and chase whatever they had. And it is as close to like feeling like a slave to something, because you're just like, these guys like send you where they want. Go get me Levi's. I want size 34 Levi's. And we would just do it. And that was like our existence. I ate very little. I didn't take care of myself. I had poor hygiene. I think at one point I hadn't brushed my teeth in months, definitely wasn't showering. And it was just sad. It was just, there's some I see some like kids that come to that life thinking that there's like this freedom. Like I get to like not have parents, not have rules. And if you get to that point that I was at, there is no freedom. Your entire day is the same thing over and over. And it's hard. You don't really get a lot of rest. And so I'm fortunate that I look back at that time and I'm so thankful I don't have to experience that again, because there was nothing good about being strung out on the streets. It was incredibly tiresome and monotonous. That's the other thing people don't talk about, is just the sheer boredom.
Really? So even though you're using a drug, it's still incredibly boring.
Yeah, because I mean, like my most excitement was a book or something. I didn't have a TV or a phone, or, I'd get a newspaper, and it's just the same thing. It's the same people. We're all doing the same stuff, chasing the same thing day after day after day after day with no vacation. And so the allure is, it's a false allure to that lifestyle that's celebrities painted out like what it's like to be a heroin addict when you're like a rock star. It's not like that for most people. It's just stressful. It's definitely stressful. I probably have some form of PTSD from that, I would imagine. Actually, I do. Even when I walk out of a store today, when I go through the RFID towers, I still, even though I know I didn't steal anything, I feel like, are they going to go off? Because that was my MO. I'd like just split out a door with whatever. I wouldn't even like worry about the tags. I would just grab it and run, or skateboard out of the store.
Yeah, of course. You can imagine how that would have lasting effects. And, I think you did a really good job there of painting a picture of what it was like. And it does sound like hell on earth. And, thank God you made your way out of that. And we touched on earlier the sort of the unconditional love of your parents and how that really comes across in the book. And it was really quite moving, I found, reading it. And this really shows because they actually tracked you down to Portland. They were following your arrests online scene and they were speaking to a police officer there or something along those lines. And so they fly over there, and one day you're standing outside the courthouse or a jail, one of the two, and you find them there. They find you, and obviously, you know, it must have been a shocking moment for them to see you in that state. And it's also really interesting because, you know, obviously they came there with the hope of getting you clean, getting you into a medical detox center, I believe, for a week, and then flying back to Hawaii. But, you know, even having not been an addict myself, as I was reading the book, I sort of had a vague idea of the turmoil inside your mind at that moment, because yes, they're your parents and you love them and you want to change, but at the same time, the draw of the drug and the addiction is so strong. So could you talk us through sort of that turmoil in your mind at that moment?
I was absolutely shocked. I mean, I had not spoken to my parents in over a year. I had no cell phone. The fact that they found me outside of a jail was crazy, because I was actually going with my friend so he could collect his things, because he had recently gotten arrested and he had to go back and get his money and sign for it. And I was waiting outside, and I had been arrested for possession, and I had a court date the next day, and the jail and the courthouse are right next door to each other. And my parents thought that they were at the courthouse, but they were actually at the jail. And I'm outside rifling through the ashtrays for snipes, for, you know, partially smoked cigarettes. And then my dad is there. I'm like, what are you doing here? And then I realized my mom is there also. And I put two and two together really quick. And I was like, why are you guys in Portland? I mean, it's like, I was just in shock. And then when I realized that they came to find me and that they found me, it was just mind blowing. And I think that I couldn't deny the fact that within like 3 hours of looking for me in the city, they found me. And I didn't have it in me to tell them the truth up front and be like, there's no way out of this mess. Like, this is my destiny. That's what I believed. It's such toxic and sick thinking that I thought that I was going to die a junkie. And I knew so many friends that had passed away. I just accepted my fate for what it was. And it was a very like shallow and depressive outlook, but I went with them, and I did go with them. And I write about what that was like. And I quickly realized, like, I can't stay with you. Like, I have to leave. And then and you know what happens. And like, I go, and my dad comes with me, and he doesn't let me out of his sight. And it's incredible to me that, you know, a lot of people can think it's coincidence. I think that they were put there for a reason. I was put there for a reason, and somebody interfered to even make that happen. And that's my belief. And it's hard to really deny that. But it's also not so cut and dry. It's not like I can just pack up and go home. I definitely had to medical detox before I did anything. I didn't want to get clean. It wasn't in my cards. And then at a certain point, it's like, I tell myself, this is their plan, not mine. And you know how that plays out. And I think it's a rough journey, but I think that sort of sets the expectation. You know, it's not like somebody can just flick a switch and like walk out of that. And that's why it's so hard for people to escape that. You know, you got to be mindful of how you do it if you want to be successful. And when you have a severe opioid dependence, it requires, in many cases, a medical detox. And jailhouse detoxes do the trick, but they're miserable. The one thing I will say to that is that you remember it. So you definitely won't forget that pain. And then you can use that pain to draw on down the road as a source of strength.
Absolutely. But, yeah. And I just found it it was almost surprising whilst reading the book that you decided to go with them because of the strength of the addiction that you're in. So you did, and you got the one last hit, and then you went into this medical detox center where you were for a couple of days at least. And how was that trying to detox from heroin through it was using Suboxone, right? Is that the drug mentioned? Yeah. So how is it still an incredibly unpleasant experience? What kind of things do you go through when you're trying to get clean, even though it's medically assisted?
In order to take Suboxone, you have to exhibit enough signs of withdrawal that you pass like a test, and you got to like tick enough boxes so that when they give it to you, they don't kick you into precipitated withdrawal, which will do like it like shakes your opioid receptors free, and it's miserable. And so they want to avoid that. So there's this like great like build up to when they can first dose you, because you have to be really sick before you take it. So you like know this is coming. It's like for many addicts, it's the one thing we fear the most. But when you get it, I remember just like it did its trick, and it was convenient, and it was almost comfortable. I remember thinking like, wow, this is like a break. Like I get to like rest for a day. And the physical elements, because you're not just good, but the physical elements and the mental elements gave way to this like sense of, I get to just relax. Like I don't have to worry about food. I don't have to worry about stealing or going to jail. All these things that just like were driving me mad suddenly were a thing of the past. And so they offset each other, and a medical detox is a gift. I mean, the nurses at Hooper Detox in Portland, Oregon, and the staff who are in recovery themselves many of them know what you're going through, and they make it as nice as they can. And then they do extra things like you get, cookies and milk, or you get movies, or you get acupuncture, or you get like a nice blanket to wrap around yourself, or you can shower if you want, and get clean. And so all these things that we were depriving ourselves of for a long time, like these creature comforts, they're available, and you can like read a book or play a game of chess, and you can just have some time. And so it's nice. It's definitely nice. But then you also know what happens. Like it's never that easy. There's always, at least for me, it felt like there was always something that was derailing me at every point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you could just talk us through that thing. Obviously it was the issue you had with the abscess on your arm, but I think it's more powerful if you explain it. Yeah. If you could walk us through that.
Yeah. So it's easy to ignore, any issue that gets in the way of your using. And so when I was using, I would occasionally get abscesses. I had pretty bad veins. I would muscle sometimes. I would skin pop. I would do some things that were not smart, but they were a means to an end. And I'd finally found like a vein in my arm that I could use. And I was going overboard with it. And I developed a pretty severe abscess in that location. And when my parents had sprung on me and surprised me, and I went with them, I had this, and it was I couldn't close my arm because I had this thing here. And when I went into the detox center, I did not disclose that I had that. And then the nurse found out that I had that when she went to like take my blood pressure. I was like giving her this arm the whole time. And she's like, what are you hiding? And so I showed her, and she did her job, and she said, this is dangerous, and this can lead to a blood clot, and you need to go get this attended to immediately. And they did what they had to do, and that was send me up to the hospital to get it lanced. And to put that in perspective, it's like you're detoxing off drugs. I was detoxing off of drugs, and so all they could give me was lidocaine. They lanced this horrific abscess, and then they packed the wound to keep it from closing on itself. And it was like, it just was really difficult. And I went back, I called my parents, and they took me back to a detox center. And it was one of those things where I think I wasn't ready to begin with. And this was the excuse I needed to say, like, you know what, it's not the right time. And I did have this throbbing pain that was just pulsating, and it was disrupting my, like, any sense I had of peace at that time. And it was enough for me to check out AMA and leave against medical advice. It was just one of those things that they had to do. And it's just part of my story. It's not something I could run with. I think that the nurse acted appropriately. And I think it was just unfortunate timing that I was only a few days into detox, and I had to get this lanced. I also was, I was scared of like MRSA too, having an open wound in a dormitory setting with a bunch of other people coming off the streets like me. So that was also played into my thinking, but ultimately I wasn't ready. And that was the excuse I used to leave and justify to my parents, who had flown home to Hawaii, why I was leaving and why I was walking out. And they didn't understand it. And it didn't matter to me that they did not understand it. That was just what it took. And
Yeah, it was a heart-wrenching moment in the book where you call them and explain that you're leaving and all the rest of it. But so then you leave and you get back to sort of those ways on the streets. But there was a critical sort of turning point or wake-up call in some respects, and that was that's the moment that you start the book with, when you were traveling around on the streets with a good friend of yours called Simon, and you wake up one morning and find that he's tragically overdosed and passed away. And part of the reason why this moment in the book is so powerful, and I think it really shows to people the strength of addiction, is because one of the next things that you did, you knew that he would have he used to keep a sort of morning hit on him. And so you checked his pockets, for that hit. Obviously, it massively affected you, and you're extremely upset. But as an addict in that position, it was almost like you couldn't pass that opportunity. And yeah, as I say, I think that just goes to show people how strong that addiction is, how much you will want it if you're in that position. But yeah, if you could tell us just how much of a shock that was for you, and what effect it had on you.
Yeah, the passing of my friend was tragic, and it affected me greatly in ways I didn't understand. And it took a long time for me to comprehend how that impacted my life and the way I thought about myself and what I was capable of. I think rifling through his pockets for dope, my dead friend's body, the reason I chose that scene was because, to me, that, like you said, that is like the depths of despair. And I think that's one example. That's my example. A lot of addicts will have their own example, some far, far worse. And I wanted to show that because that really defined where my addiction took me, or where I let my addiction take me. And the way that I justified it was just as it was sick thinking all the way around, and I told myself that he would want me to have this, or he's not going to use it, or whatnot. But if I back it up, I actually left him there. I actually left the scene, and that was also just as debilitating to me later, to think that I would just abandon someone like that so callously. Would I want that for me? Of course not. Of course I wouldn't want that. And it was something that I processed later. It's not something, I'll be honest, it's not something that drove me up the walls when it happened. I was highly medicated. I was using. If anything, I went and I leveraged that tragedy to get what I wanted from other people. Be like, oh, woe is me. I just went through this horrific thing. Like, can you please give me a bag of dope? Because I'm like in shambles. Like, I used it, right? I used it to get what I wanted. It was extremely manipulative, sick thinking, addict thinking. A lot of addicts can relate to that. In hindsight, that has become something that's actually quite positive for where I am today. And it's almost like an easy reminder that is something I'm never going back to. I turned that negative into a positive, and that's what I found I have to do to keep a program going. I mean, coming up on 10 years clean, I'm fortunate that I don't have this draw to that life. And that's a huge part of why I look back at that and I don't like want that anymore. There's nothing that appeals to me. I mean, I'm fortunate that wasn't me. And the other thing I will say is that in my book, I talk about they call it, not to get too graphic, but they call it like the death rattle. I didn't know what that was. And I'm working on a new project, and I learned that it was agonal breathing that my friend was experiencing next to me, that I woke up and then went back to sleep and ignored. And I didn't know what it was, but in hindsight, like I did have a chance to possibly change the outcome. I can't beat myself up over it. I can't change the past. But it's one tragedy of many, many tragedies that happen when you dabble in that lifestyle. And it's really unfortunate, because he was a good person, and he was a kind friend, and he was a good guy, and he was intelligent and likable. And to be frank, I'll show you a picture later, but you remind me a lot of him. Like, you guys look similar. You guys, it's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate that he didn't have the opportunity to go on and get clean and sober like I did, because he deserved it like anyone else would have deserved it. But that's not how life plays out sometimes.
No, absolutely. It is so tragic, you know, it is so tragic. And, you know, I also really respected as a, as a reader, the honesty, you know, starting with that scene and being so honest about how you know, what you did and how you dealt with it. I think a lot of people would have missed details out to make themselves look better, and you chose not to do that. And I think that says a lot about the person, that you are today. And it was around this time. So after that, obviously, you know, you carried on using, and you were caught with heroin by a security guard somewhere. So that meant that you caught a possession charge, and then I think on top of that, like a failure to appear charge. So you had then two warrants out for your arrest. And I think I'm right in saying that the possession charge at that time was a felony, right?
Yeah. Portland was like they were a little more lenient on drug charges, but it was a felony. It was definitely something I was trying to avoid.
Absolutely, yeah, and again that comes across in the book, and obviously, yeah, you had the failing to appear as well. But it was it was also around this time, and I guess you know, the passing of Simon also played a part in that, and these charges stacking up, where finally you thought, this is not going to work out. I actually want to change now. And you know, you made contact with your parents and made those intentions clear. I think I'm right in saying from the book, and you got yourself back into Hooper detox, and you did a week in there, and then your parents came over, and you managed to fly back to Hawaii, obviously, where the treatment continued. But it wasn't that simple, because you knew that you had these warrants out. You'd actually heard that the police were looking for you. So yeah, could you tell us about what made you finally want to change yourself? Because when you tried before, when your parents came and found you, you weren't ready, right? But this time it was on your own accord, and I guess that's really important. So yeah, what was different about it this time? And if you could tell us about how things played out once you'd made that decision.
What was different was the experience I had with my friend's death. Now it's not something that changed me overnight. It took about 4 months for that to really sink in, and for me to finally come to the realization that this is not the life I wanted. But it wasn't something that happened immediately. Like I said, I went directly to my dealer straight after that. Things were just grueling. Things were bad, and I don't know. I think that I didn't believe it was possible to get clean. I thought that it was dangerous, actually, if I'm honest. I thought that people that attempted to get clean would get, you know, a short bit of sobriety, relapse, and then die, which is how my friend died. My friend was incarcerated for a few weeks, released, and then died a few days after jail. By the way, 70%, your chance of overdose goes up 70% after 2 days of incarceration if you're an opioid addict. And so it's like it's a very real problem, this like getting released with no support and going right back to what you had. But I just thought that I knew what I was working against all along. And when I had that experience with my friend Simon, it was really gutting, and it was something that made me think that maybe this wasn't where I wanted to be. And it's so weird, because if you're listening to this and you don't have that experience, you're like, well, what do you mean this isn't somewhere you want to be? Of course it's not. It's not so cut and dry. Like, this addiction is a physical, mental, and spiritual crushing, debilitating force that it's very hard to break up with that. It's very hard to even think that you can move past that, or you want to move past that. But I also think I had this like random, just like spurt to be like, you know what, let's do it. Let's just call mom and like allude to maybe I'm ready and see what happens. And I don't know where that came from. It could have been from years of suffrage. It could have been from a bad day. I went and I made that contact. And I think that was my first step to say like, hey, like now it's in my court. Like, I'm the one that wants to take this. You're not telling me to like go into detox. Like, I think I should go into detox. And so that was different. That's what I think made that time at Hooper different.
Yeah, I can imagine it's actually really empowering when you're the one making the decision and not having it imposed on you. And so yeah, you you got into Hooper, you did the week long medical detox, and I think that the sort of agreement that you'd had with your parents was that you would hand yourself in to the police and sort out your warrants before going back. But I can certainly imagine the anxiety you had about what might happen, and you weren't quite ready to face that. And so what you actually did was you flew back to Hawaii with your parents. You got a temporary driving license, which served as your ID, and nothing was flagged up at the airport, and you were lucky to get home in that sense. And when you got back, your parents had arranged for you to check into Sand Island Treatment Center in Hawaii, right? Which was going to be something like somewhere in the region of a 2-year program, inpatient program. And reading the book, it almost comes across as a prison or military training camp. The way that some of the staff would talk, and sort of the privileges that you'd have to earn. But I don't know. I guess maybe that sort of harsh setting is needed when you're dealing with so many people with such a strong addiction. But yeah, could you tell us a bit about their treatment method at Sand Island, and also how difficult the first sort of blackout period was for you?
Yeah. So one thing I'll add is that when I was going to turn myself in, but when I left detox, I heard that the police were looking for me, which didn't make sense. Even for the felonious charges that I had, that wasn't something I had known any cop to go out and look for someone for. They would just pick you up on a bench warrant. The police were busy. So that convinced me it was something bigger, and I could only attribute it to the incident with my friend's passing. And so I was afraid. And so that definitely helped me leave the city, and it definitely added to the stress to get out. Sand Island Treatment Center is, I didn't know what I was walking into, and my parents didn't know. There's not much information online. I didn't know anyone that had gone to that program. I didn't even know where it was, even though it was so close to my parents' factory on Sand Island. It is one of only 2 long-term inpatient programs here on Oahu, which is the island I live on. The other being Habilitat, which I believe is either 30 months or I think it's maybe 3 years. I think it's different. It was a shock. I walked into that not quite knowing what it was. And I think that in many ways, it's a tough program. It's not like your classic 30-day Malibu treatment center. They give you what you need. All your needs are met medically. You have your good food. You're safe. They take care of your wants, but not necessarily. They take care of your needs, not necessarily your wants. And the first 30 days is blackouts. There's no communication with the outside world, and that's really smart because you don't have like a girlfriend or wife calling you up to like talk to you or help you spin yourself out.
Yeah.
But I didn't sleep for the first, even with the medical detox, I still didn't sleep for the first 30 days. It was grueling, and it was very difficult to adjust and cope, and for my body and my mind to adapt to the fact that I was somewhere foreign. And I had very sick thinking for a very long time about just wanting to use and how could I leave? And even though I was a walk-in and there on my own accord, it was hard. There was this like pressure to stay in, and eventually there would be peer pressure to stay in too. So the clients, I'm just as thankful for the clients that were in there. They helped support me through just as much as the staff did. A lot of the clients come by way of prison and jail, which probably lends to a feeling of a prison or jail. But it's not. I mean, like anyone can walk out at any time. There's a gate. You just go and you tell them your intentions, and they'll ask you, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want this? Like, do you really want to leave?" And then they'll try and talk you out of it because they want the best for you, but you're free to go. I mean, there's not like guards there, but there's this definite, a lot of the people there have gone through some of the shorter programs that didn't work or didn't take. And it's almost like the end of the road. Not for me. I went straight to it. I just like hopped into a 2-year treatment program. And for a long time, people were like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you here?" But that place saved my life. That place it's nice because the people, much like Hooper, that run it are in recovery themselves. Almost all of them have gone through the program before, and that's why they're still there. And so you have the sense of like, well, hey, look, we did it, and we know where you're at and what you're going through, and it's this like empathy that's hard to emulate with just a degree on paper. Not to discredit anyone out there that doesn't have that experience. You can help. I'm not saying you can't or that you have to be an addict to be productive or efficient, but I look to that as like proof that it would work. The other thing is it starts off kind of bare bones, but then over time you get more and more things, right? So they take away everything. They give you a big book. The program is irregardless of your drug of choice, it's a 12-step program that they use to run through whatever your addiction is. So that took me a while to get accustomed to. I'm like, I'm here for heroin, IV heroin and cocaine. And you're giving me a big book. Sure, I had issues with alcohol, but I've been drinking since I started doing dope. And it doesn't matter. I think there's some credit to what they say. You can use the same principles for pretty much, even though AA doesn't endorse it or support it, I found that you can use that for at least I found it worked for my addiction. So it's a wonderful program. I love what they do there, and I can't say enough nice things about them. But it's definitely different from what I think a lot of people think of when they think of a treatment program.
Absolutely, yeah. And what really comes across in the book is also, you say how fantastic they were, but we shouldn't underestimate the amount of work that has to go in for the individual that you had to put in, because like as you detailed to me before, you didn't sleep for like a month when you first got there, right? Going through the withdrawals and, anyone who's had a couple of nights bad sleep, like think how you feel. So, you going through 30 nights of no sleep, you can imagine the mental state that you must have been in. And I'm sure there were a lot of other sort of physical effects alongside that. So I think it's incredibly impressive that you stuck at it for the whole time. But were there any times, Jordan, where you wanted to throw the towel in?
Sure.
Because I know having read the book that there were some because you actually had a one-way ticket to Seattle. Is that right? Was it Seattle?
No, it was anywhere. It was just for the airline.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
A voucher.
Okay. I don't know where I've got Seattle from, but
that's how I got it was when we left Portland, the plane had a mechanical issue. They sent us to Seattle to fix it.
That's where I've got it.
And then they gave everyone on board a flight voucher. And so I had a temporary driver's license with the fixed expiration date and a flight voucher. And I was like, this is like my golden ticket to get out. And like, I can like pull the cord and bounce anytime. And that was like, I should have just like,
you ripped it up and thrown it away, and then you wouldn't have had that option. But that's what I mean. It makes it even more impressive because you knew you had that flight ticket, and there were moments where you were finding it really tough. So what stopped you from throwing the towel in?
I think that I was afraid of what was going on in Portland. I didn't know what sort of legal issues were there for me. I also, by making a geographical change from Portland to Hawaii, Hawaii has a meth epidemic, but heroin, I'm sure there's some heroin out here, but it's nothing like Portland. And so it was like, well, if I leave the program, I have to fly back if I want to go back to using. Like I didn't, even though I'm from here, I didn't know anyone here. I didn't have any triggers or haunts or dealers or friends that like could hook me up. I mean, I met some people in treatment, but I don't know. I think that it's one of those things where when you have like 150 people and most of them are going for the same goal, it's you can't underestimate reverse peer pressure when people tell you like, hey, you can do this, like you can stick it out. I had a shadow, so someone that was with me for the first 7 days, and when I was going through the post-acute withdrawal symptoms, and he saw what I was going through, he was like a rock for me. He would tell me, you can get through this and don't worry, and it's going to be okay. And I've seen other guys come here off heroin that did it. And that's the other thing, is not a lot of guys in that program were there for heroin either. A lot of them were there for meth. There were some older gentlemen there for alcohol, but I felt like one of the few. that not only was I there for heroin, but I was a walk-in, meaning like I didn't have a court order to be there. I didn't have like probation officer that was going to put out a warrant for me if I left. And so I like could leave, but I don't know. I think that I think that it rubbed off in me in a way that is, I have to say it's the people and it's the place and then it's the time, because it for someone that didn't sleep for the first month, it's hard for me to envision how much healing I could have got if I went to a 30-day program. Again, not to discredit any short-term programs. I think we need all the tools that we can get, but I just know for myself that that like whole time I was enduring just like my physical body, it's hard to picture myself making any sort of headway mentally. And so I'm just fortunate that I had the gift of time to be there. And then also there was some sense of, I don't want to let my parents down for sure. But I did struggle with it a lot. And a lot of it was internal. And a lot of it I hid. I didn't tell my counselor like, hey, I want to leave. I told him sometimes, but when I went back and I read my journals, it was like a constant grueling day in, day out battle. And how I made it through that is just, it's beyond me. I think it's a true testament to what those people have going on there. And I'm fortunate because I had friends that didn't make it through. I should also point out that Sand Island is an abstinent program. So there is no assisted treatment. There's no MAT. They don't give you much to help. They give you like psych meds if you have like, psych issues and you have a prescription, you get your prescription, but there's nothing to like take the edge off, which is nice because I remember it and I'm never going back to it. But I will say that I saw a lot of people leave that program that just didn't want to put up with it. And who knows what happened to them. So there's definitely an argument to be made for both. On one hand, you can have that memory of how horrible it was to draw on, but then on the other hand, you don't have that if you're dead. So I'm definitely an advocate for all the tools that are out there. I think that we're all unique and that we're all different and that recovery is as personal as it gets. And what worked for me doesn't have to work for anyone but me, and vice versa.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right to point out everyone is different. And for some people, it will be medically assisted or whatever. And for you, it was, a mix of both really, because you had the week at Hooper and then you had the abstinence of being at Sand Island. So I think you should be incredibly proud of the fact that you got through that program, because it certainly does not come across in the book as being an easy ride. You really had to fight and you really had to want it. And then, as you mentioned a little while ago, that you would start to get some privileges, i.e. the first thing would be a family visit. Then eventually you would get to go out for the day. Then you would get to go out for the night. You'd get to go to the beach or whatever for a day, etc., etc. But I'm wondering how it felt when you were finally ready to say, and you talk about it in the book, when you go to them and you say, that's it. I think I'm going to check out. I've got to go and sort out my outstanding warrants, over there. Could you talk to us about your decision to leave and to face the charges against you?
Yeah. So Sand Island is broken up into basically two sections. Like the first 4 to 6 months is intensive treatment. And you're there and you're basically in classes and meetings and counseling sessions. And you're basically really working on yourself intimately. After that, you move into transition where you go out and you are working and you have a job and you have a 9 to 5 and you go out and you are coming back and you're doing minimal things to stay plugged in. You're living on property, but you're basically in and out. So it's not like you're 2 years in the program. And they even adjust it depending on their bed space and how you do. So I've seen people kind of breeze through it. With me being a walk-in, I always struggled with the fact that, and that's a long time. 2 years is a long time of your life to commit to anything. And a lot of my peers were there on paper. They were there reducing sentences. They were there because when they got their clinical discharge from the program, they would walk out like a free man, quote unquote, a free man. but I had these warrants, and these felonious warrants don't just go away. And it ate at me. I knew that it was something I would have to address at some point. Sand Island kept telling me, do the right thing, get the right results, do the right thing, get the right results. They were ingraining in me doing the right thing. And I eventually told myself, I need to do the right thing. And whether or not it was a right decision, I had no idea. But at that time, I had been there for a while. And I said, I'm going to turn myself in, and I want to take care of this. I need to take care of this because I need to be able to move on with my life. And I felt like I was like hiding out. Like I was working. I was doing all the right things. I was confident in my sobriety and my program of recovery. And I just had this like weight on my shoulders, and it was something that I felt like I had to do. And not a lot of people agreed with me. A lot of people thought it was a bad decision. Ultimately, it turned out to be not what I expected, but it worked in my favor. And I'm very fortunate in that regard that I was able to go and do what I did and take care of it the way I did. But it was definitely hard, and you almost have the sense of you're letting down the people around you. I mean, because my counselor, who was like became my mentor, who's now my close friend, it was very difficult to tell him like, hey, I think it's time to go. It's really hard to like break out of that when you get to a certain point and you like see all the good things happening in your life and you're getting the right results. It's hard to justify like changing it. And the program often would beat into us like, it's not on your time, it's on God's time, or it's not up to you, or let it play out, or trust the process. And this was like kind of flying in the face of what I was learning and what I intended to do. But I also felt this like drive to do it because I was afraid that if I didn't take care of it, I would leave and I would still have to take care of it. And I didn't know what would happen. And so with the great unknown, it's you make the decisions you kind of feel you have to. And that's what I did. And it was hard. It was hard to tell that to people.
I can imagine, but I can also perfectly understand that you felt the need that you had to do it. I can't imagine the anxiety of having those two felonies hanging over your head, having not appeared for them, and also having known that the police were looking for you. I think that would massively have affected me. So I can certainly imagine your need to go back and deal with it. So you did go back. You checked out of Sand Island and you flew back to Portland to deal with these charges. And luckily, it went in your favor. It went really well for you. Could you explain to the listeners a bit about what happened and how that worked out for you?
Yeah, I had this like grand idea that the judge would be very proud of me for like going into treatment and taking care of business. And I thought like I was hoping he would just dismiss my charges based on my length of sobriety, based on Sand Island supporting me in that and giving like supplemental documentation to show that I was there. And the judge he did like respect the fact that I went to treatment, but he also did not appreciate the fact that I took the legal matters into my own hands. And so when I wrote this scene, I actually, most of my book, I dove into deep research, even from my friend's overdose. I went and I petitioned to get the death report, and they had to ask why, and I had to justify why I wanted it, what I was going to do with it. And I also did the same when I went to court and I got the court transcripts. And so when I went back and listened to it, it just reaffirmed my memory that the judge laid into me a little bit about how if everyone ran about doing what they thought was best for themselves, it would be pure chaos. And so he had to enact some measure of justice upon me, which I understood as well too. And it was scary because the drug court that I was pleading guilty to my felonies in Portland typically keeps someone in Portland for 2 years or 1 year, depending on it, to run through their charges and to expunge their record. That's the deal. And so I didn't have anything left for me in Portland. It was a dangerous place for me to be. I knew that going back to it. And Judge Lopez, Honorable Judge Lopez, granted me grace and allowed me to come back and treat back here in Hawaii. So I actually came back and I did a year of outpatient at Sand Island. And Um, it was a really intelligent decision of him, because that was also, I found a period in my life where it was very useful to have accountability, because I was transitioning from a program into the real world. And so to have to check in multiple times a week and have to do random UAs and have to have counseling sessions for a year during that period of my life really helped out. And
So
so
that was
it
all court ordered, right?
it was ordered, yeah. So they actually they made like a custom plan, like a custom treatment plan. And for me to satiate the courts, I had to fulfill it. And Sand Island would not have allowed me to do that, because they don't have like outpatient like that. But because it was court ordered, they worked with me. And so to their credit, I mean, I'm very much a product of the life that they showed me was possible. And it a lot of things came together, and it worked out. And I'm fortunate that it worked out.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. And it must have taken so much guts to fly back to a place that had caused you so much harm, and you had so many sort of haunting memories. I really respect the fact that you went back there and you dealt with that. And I think it goes to show, you did the right thing, and it turned out well for you, So I think there's an important message there. Jordan, I'm wondering just how good it felt when, so you'd completed the outpatient stuff, you're back you're back at home in your own community, you're working, you're clean by this point at probably a couple of years. Just how much better was your life at that point compared to, when you were at your worst?
The thing with recovery is that you don't get back everything you lose, right? So I had a relationship with a woman that I thought, it was actually my fiance at the time. And you lose these sort of relationships, and you lose these other material things. And there's a lot of adjustment that comes to that, like to the what if, like, what if I hadn't screwed up my life? Like, where would I be? And so it took a long time for me to appreciate what I had. And then for me to believe in the future that I had. I think that over time, when you do the right thing and you get the right results and things start happening and you start like earning more money, and you get a car, and you get like, and you start building the life that you wanted. I just remember at one point, like, I think I became a believer, like, this is going to work out. And that's when I felt like I crested, like I hit this point where my life was too good to be true. But it wasn't. It was like, it was my life. And it was really beautiful. And it took a long time for me to break out of my shell. I had understandably taken quite a bit of knocks to my confidence. And so to get back in like the dating game, like that was something that took a long time to feel confident and comfortable doing. But things eventually, your wins start like stacking up, and it's amazing. I mean, today where I'm at compared to where I came from, I will say I've had a tremendous support system. I understand that that's a privilege not everyone has. Not everyone has parents or a program or friends that want the best for them. I do. And I have like an extended family, especially here in Hawaii, where like your parents' friends become your aunties and uncles. It's very like a cultural collective, like upbringing style. I had a lot of people rooting for me, and I'm very fortunate in that regard. But it is really, it's what they talk about, like the promises of the program, where you stop shooting yourself in the foot. You'd be amazed how far you can go. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I'm a homeowner, I'm married, I have a 5-month-old beautiful son that is like the joy of my life. I am writing full time. I'm actually like living the dream, and I'm sober, and I'm like healthy, and I'm happy. And it's really, really important that others that want that for themselves know that it's within reach. Because I remember thinking it was impossible to get clean. And I remember thinking it was stupid to attempt to get clean. And that's not the case whatsoever. And it's just, it's really night and day. And it's a beautiful thing. I love it. I mean, it's probably why I'm so grateful to say I'm a grateful addict and alcoholic in recovery. I look back at that time as actually now something that was really beneficial to me, because I'm 35. I've been sober for 10 years. I've been successful. I don't bumble around drinking thinking I'm a functional alcoholic or addict. I don't have that idea. And so I'm not like dragging myself down. Like I'm able to achieve what I want to achieve from a relatively early age, which is kind of cool, like kind of, I went through a lot of stuff, but I was able to bounce back, and now I can move forward with knowing what works and what doesn't work.
It's incredibly inspiring, the way that you just described how things are now, and that's absolutely true. And I think that gives a lot of hope to people going through their own stuff at the moment. If you hadn't been through all of that, yes, it was horrendous, but if you hadn't been through all of that, you wouldn't be a writer now. You wouldn't have quit your day job, living that dream and chasing that dream. So there was purpose in it, and you've done incredibly well to find that purpose and to really turn it into something positive. But Jordan, there is one thing that I did want to touch on, which is also detailed in the book, which was an incredibly tragic event and must have been incredibly tough for you. And that was the passing of your brother, who lost his battle with alcoholism. I think it was, and you were the one to actually to find him. And I can't imagine how tough that must have been for you. There's no way I can even begin to imagine how that must have felt. And there was certainly sort of the thought going through my mind as I was reading the book, would that be sort of, would that push someone to use again? But sort of incredibly, it didn't break your resolve in your own sobriety. And I'm just wondering if you could, if you're able to, if you could talk to us a bit about sort of how that affected you and how you kept your sort of resolve and your sobriety through such a tough and tragic moment.
Yeah, that was devastating. That was just a couple of years ago. My poor parents, we didn't really give them, just the three of us, we've all had our issues. And I got clean. I was fortunate to go into a treatment center. My brother, Jonathan, always like refuted the idea that he was an alcoholic. And, but it's weird. He like lived vicariously through my recovery. So he was always so proud of me and like my biggest supporter and so happy for me. Yet he was drinking himself to death. And he lived close to me, like 30 minutes away. And it was hard because I have these boundaries with other alcoholics and addicts that I don't go and I don't like have any business with them, with someone that's active in their addiction. I just don't. I mean, it's just part of what I do to stay clean. But my brother is my brother. And so we hung out all the time, and those boundaries were murky and it was difficult, and he didn't want to talk about it. And I still have regrets. I know people tell me I know that people tell me you can't beat yourself up over that sort of thing, but I do. I went and did a welfare check on my brother, and he had passed away in his kitchen, and it was a really sad experience. And I cleaned up his house with my family, and we took out the like trash bag, contractor bag after contractor bag of beer cans. And it was gutting. It was so sad. And
take all the time you need, man. Take all the time you need.
Yeah. I think that, like a lot of people were worried about how I would respond to that. And like, would I use that as an excuse to go and like drink or use? But it wasn't. It was like, it reaffirmed to me that because we're so much alike, that could have been me and that should have been me. And I drank the way that he drank. Like I looked around his house. I'm like, this is what my dorm room looked like. I would wake up and like drink warm beer off the edge of my bedside and it just was, it's so unfortunate. And that's so tragic that he didn't get the opportunity. Like my friend Simon, like he was a good person, and he could have had a way out. There was recoveries available to anyone that wants it.
I can't imagine how tough that was for you. And I think it speaks of sort of the strength that you have in your sobriety, that didn't cause you to relapse. And also, one thing that I love about what you're doing now with the book, for example, that you wrote with One Hit Away, which I recommend everybody reads, and the link will be in the description. And the reason why I love that work that you're doing, Jordan, is because it has the ability, that book and subsequent materials that you might create, to show people that there is a way out of addiction and out of that lifestyle, whether it's a family member reading it and motivating them to sort of want to do something, or whether it's the person in question. It has the ability to change lives, and I'm sure it has changed lives in some way. So I love the fact that you're doing that, and I guess having experienced that tragic loss in your own family, it must motivate you to want to make a difference, and to want to get the word out there about addiction and all the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that addiction by its very nature is incredibly devastating. I am fortunate that the first place I went to after leaving my brother's apartment, after they carried him away, was to the treatment center to hug my counselor. And I met him at the gate, and I go there when things are going good, and I go there when things are going bad. And it was, I knew what I had to do, and I just wanted to be around people that wanted the best for me. And I mean, my mom and dad were there too, but they were also understandably equally in shambles. And so I excused myself, and I went to, and I just checked in. And I think that was like, that's sort of been ingrained in me, that, like we trust ourselves, but we also set ourselves up for success or failures by our decisions. And I definitely am grateful to have the support of them. As far as the book's been amazing. It has put me in contact with a lot of people. It has connected me with addicts, with the family members of addicts. It has connected me with industry professionals, treatment personnel. It's an incredible vessel that's really pulled me out of my shell, because one thing I didn't mention was Sand Island is a closed treatment center, meaning like you can't go there and just pop in for a meeting if you're not a client, staff, or PO. And so I spent most of my entire period up to the book, like in that world. And by writing about it and talking about it, it's got me talking to you. It's got me talking to all sorts of different venues about recovery. And I'm an introvert by nature. And so to get out there and be talking so openly and freely it's been life-changing. And it's been life-changing in a good way. I mean, this is what I want to do. This is why I left my job, is I found like incredible purpose in talking about this and using it to not just better myself, but to give back, because that's sort of what it's about. Like, I am so grateful for the people that took the time to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. And so I want to do that if or when I can, wherever I can. And it's been really cool. Like the random messages or DMs from people that read my book from wherever, it's been nice. Or the reviews when I go on and read, like, that's also like a direct message when people say like how it impacted them. It blows my mind, because I wasn't expecting that. I was actually quite fearful I'd put in this energy and effort and no one would care, because that's often how it is with independent books. It's very hard to get traction and get the word out. But I think I put everything I have into it, and I think that's people see it for what it is.
Absolutely. And it became a bestseller as well, which is that
right? Yeah. So it did really good. It won Best Book of the Year for 2020, which is incredible, that a book on mental health like beat out like romance. I mean, it's not a competition. Like, it's not, I didn't write the book for that, but I think it's a testament to the fact that it's my heart's in it. And it's definitely, I think it rings true.
Absolutely. I think you should be so incredibly proud of everything that you've achieved, coming from the streets of Portland in total despair to now being a best-selling author. I mean, it's an incredible story, and one I think which deserves a film, really. And feeling that you've touched so many people's lives with that book and changed people's lives must be an incredible feeling. And I think, you should be proud of that, no end. And I found that interesting, actually, that you said a minute ago that you're an introvert, because every time I've spoken to you, you don't come across to me as an introvert at all. I find you very easy to talk to, but in your daily life, are you normally quite sort of to yourself?
Yeah, I don't get out
Yeah.
much. I don't, I keep to myself. I'm a thinker. I have a close circle. I have a small orbit. I enjoy talking about this sort of thing because I believe it's important to have this discussion. Um, but I'm not like one to like post like selfies about myself. Like I'd rather post pictures of my kids or like whatever. Like I I like to like be behind the scenes. I don't necessarily feel comfortable in like crowds, but that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that that's probably like an important part of why I am who I am, and it's not like you can change it if I wanted to. So
Absolutely, there's absolutely nothing bad in that at all. I just found it interesting because from having spoken to you, I would have thought it would have been the other way. But yeah, that's interesting. Jordan, could you tell us about the book that you're writing at the moment and what we can expect from you, sort of content wise, in the future?
yeah, so it's fortuitous that you picked today for this interview. So today is National Harm Reduction Day. So for those that don't know, harm reduction, while there's no like general consensus for a definition, it's basically like public health policies and practices that reduce the damage from certain things. And when I talk about harm reduction, I'm talking about harm reduction as it applies to addiction and people that use drugs. So syringe exchange programs, naloxone distribution, those sort of things. I am alive today because I received naloxone or Narcan from the syringe exchange in Portland, Oregon. I've actually been saved by my own naloxone, and I've saved other people that were overdosing with that. And so that's a really big part of my story. And I believe that it's often misunderstood. Like people have these guttural reactions to syringe exchange programs. They think like, well, they just enable what people to use or they're encouraging addiction. It's not the case. Actually, studies have proven that there's no influx in use where there's a syringe exchange. If anything, they're making the communities safer by testing for STIs and Hep C and HIV and whatnot. And so this book that I'm working on now is actually taking place in a syringe exchange. It's a fictional novel based on my experiences, and it's detailing a fictional mass opioid overdose event in Portland. When I say fictional, it happens all the time where fentanyl analogs find their way into the drug supply. And this is what I decided to put my energy into because I want to tell the story of the people that I know, as I know them, that work in harm reduction and how important and integral they are to help people that are actively using drugs so that if or when they do make it out of that life, they do so with less damage and baggage to carry with them. So I contracted hepatitis C when I was using, and I'm fortunate I went in and took care of that at the liver center and that I'm quote unquote cured because I went through the interferon. But a lot of people get diseases, and if they get clean and sober, it's hard, and it's hard on them and it's hard on the community. And so I wanted to show why a place like a syringe exchange program, how beneficial that is. I mean, the overdose awareness, the overdose prevention, the outreach, people don't even think about this, but they're one of the biggest funnels into recovery. Is you go to say you're working at a syringe exchange program and I see you every day, and then I have a bad day and I say, hey man, like I think I'm done. Well, you can turn around and give me a referral to Hooper Detox because you guys are in the same network. And so they get people into treatment continuously. And it's like, people don't see that. I also think that there's a lot of moral gray areas. We briefly talked about this, like if you're volunteering and a pregnant woman comes in requesting needles and it's gutting, what do? Do you deny her based on your own morals and you say, no, I'm not going to enable you to do that? Or do you look at it from the perspective of if she quits using, it is potentially lethal to the baby? And so you say, we want to give you clean supplies to keep this baby as healthy as possible. And it's this like dichotomy of what's the right decision and why is the one that your gut initially says to go to, why could that possibly maybe not be the right decision? And it leaves room for education. And it's that like area I want to talk about and have that discussion, because obviously I went through it. It affected me greatly, and I see tremendous value in what they do. And I'm literally alive because of their efforts. And so that's the story I'm I'm using this overdose event to kind of run through the motions of what happens. And it's been eye-opening because I'm learning a lot. I'm learning that there's this whole other side of addiction, this giant network from reporting agencies through the AMR, from the paramedics and the medics, the transporting agencies, to the ER, to the ICUs, to the detoxes, to the police. They're all talking, and they all like tabletop and have these exercises where they walk through fictional overdose events and how would they respond. And it's mind-blowing to hear that there's these smart, compassionate people like ready and waiting for stuff to hit the fan. And it's really impactful because I didn't know that. I was just like on the receiving end, taking what I could and saying thank you. But to hear how well thought out and constructed the response plan is, it's fascinating. And public health it's an incredibly integral component to a functioning society, and how we treat people that use drugs and houseless, and our houseless population says a lot about our society as a whole. And so it's fascinating. And I have some contributors. So my friend Haven from the Syringe Exchange program is helping me with ideas and reaffirming beliefs and preventing me from proceeding with stigmas. It's incredible. And I love it. It's like a puzzle. It's like playing a big game of chess and trying to figure out where the pieces go. And then, of course, teaching people along the way. So.
Wow, it sounds like an incredibly important book, because you've seen firsthand how important places like those syringe exchanges are, and obviously there are things are getting really bad at the moment. So if it can inform people and help those in power to make better decisions based on books like yours in the future, I think that's a really important thing to do. So again, I think you should be so proud of the work that you're doing, Jordan. And again, to reiterate, I recommend everyone reads the book that has come out, One Hit Away, because I read it, and obviously I haven't been an addict, but I learned so much by reading it, and I think it is something that everyone should try and learn about, because it is so rampant in society, and so I certainly found it beneficial in that sense. So I recommend everyone read that, and obviously we're all looking forward to this second book coming out as well. So people should keep eyes out for that. Jordan, you know how I like to finish off the podcast, and that is by getting guests to give listeners a few bits of advice should they ever find themselves going through tough situations. And you can either take that sort of down the route of your own personal experiences in terms of addiction, or you can give advice which might be able to sort of be taken more generally by someone going through something totally different. That's totally up to you. I'll leave that down to you. But yeah, if you've got a couple of bits of advice which you could leave us with.
Sure. I will say that the one thing that really helped me, and it's almost become a mantra, is that if you're a person that suffers from addiction and you want to move into a life of recovery, I tell people that recovery is as personal as it gets. Take what you can and leave the rest. There's a lot of unsolicited advice, like what I'm saying right now, but there's a lot of people out there that think it's their way or the highway, or have these strong positions, and they're not always safe. They could have good intentions, but within reason, and obviously being careful of what you pick and choose. Be mindful of the fact that there's a reason that you might not know why we do certain things, or why people suggest you do certain things. But it's okay to take what works for you, and you don't have to be pressured or bullied or forced into stopping or starting something just because someone else tells you to do that. So I think that's really important to figure out what works, because it's at least in my opinion, it's an end game. It's like a long process. My goal is to die sober. And in order to get there, obviously I need something that works for me, and I wouldn't stick with something if it didn't. So I think that's really valuable. If you love an addict, if you love someone that is in the throes of addiction, I would, if you haven't already, it's pretty common, but it's fairly common for addicts to push those that love them away because they're the biggest threat to their addiction. My brother did this to my parents. He said some really horrible things before he passed. He was trying to get them to stop coming over to check on him. And he was trying to push them away and keep them away. And it worked. They just backed off. And I think that was indicative of like sick and manipulative thinking. And so be mindful of that. If you love an addict, just be careful and don't give up hope, because you never know when someone is willing to get help and when they're ready to receive help. I myself was going into treatment for the wrong reasons. I was running from problems. I wasn't running towards a solution. I was trying to escape. And it clicked. And I'm very fortunate that happened. Another piece of advice would be, if you have an interview, have someone over to watch your dogs in the other room so that they don't start playing, or put up the tennis balls so they don't go bananas.
Mate, honestly, look, I haven't heard them that much. I think you got away with that one. There's been barking a few times, but yeah, I think you got away with that one. But Jordan, listen, I think, there are some really important things that you said there, from someone who has been there and lived it. And I just want to say, above all, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. And I really, again, encourage everyone to support what you're doing, whether that's by buying the book or following you on social media and all the rest of it. And again, we'll put all of your social links in the description. So yeah, I'm grateful for you coming on, Jordan. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. I was looking forward to this for a long time. So I'm so happy that to sit here and talk story, and fantastic interview, amazing questions, and a great discussion. So thank you for the opportunity to let me speak my mind, to ask thoughtful and probing questions, and to kind of get to the bottom of a lot of what makes me the person I am today. So I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I really appreciate that as well. And it's been great. So yeah, thanks, Jordan, and take care.
Okay, aloha.
That's it for today's episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it or found it useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and also that way it makes sure that you never miss an episode. If you've got a story you want to share on the Back on Track podcast, get in touch, give me a shout. I'd love to hear from you via info@backontrackpodcast.com.